Um, we will now be talking about the different types of research articles, and it is important to note this before we discuss how to write a manuscript. So this brings us to the question that when is an article considered scientific? Uh, you might like to think that the structure might lead to the name scientific. Yes, some articles do need to be in a particular structure, but we might challenge some notions here today and find that some articles are not that structured as we might like to believe. Peer review is an essential component of scientific article writing, and it validates the findings because accomplished peers review your article and they verify the details, and it is acceptable for publication only then. Apart from that, maybe articles are scientific when they talk about science, um, although it may not always be so, as we will see in a few minutes. So why do we need to understand what are the types of articles? Mainly because when you read an article, you allocate appropriate credence because some kinds of articles and research carry greater weightage than others. Also, if you as a scientist or as a clinician or researcher have some observations, you would like to validate them, and you need to use the optimal methods for successful publication. So by convention, there are primary, secondary, and tertiary kinds of scientific articles apart from gray literature, and then there are some special articles which we will talk about today. So primary articles form the core group. These are the most frequently encountered kind of articles in journals. They primarily consist of data which is synthesized by the investigator. So data which is collected, curated, analyzed, and it is a discovery of some sort. And it can be of various kinds, starting from the lowest form of evidence, which is case series and case reports, to case control studies, where you have a disease group, mostly for us, people like us, and then a control group, which might be healthy or a disease control. Then there are cohort studies and randomized control trials, followed by systematic reviews. Sometimes you are trying to assess a diagnostic test, which comes under case control most of the times, although it could also vary depending on the structure of the study. So before we go into greater detail, you might like to familiarize yourself with the observational study designs. So case control versus cohort. Mainly it depends on when an exposure is unknown and a disease is known, we study the diseased versus the individuals who are not diseased in a case control study. While if the exposure is known and the disease has occurred, this is the point when we are conducting research. So the disease has not yet occurred is when we call it a prospective study. While sometimes all the events have occurred and we want to know if the disease is there or not, and this is a retrospective cohort study. So primary research is basically new knowledge. So you start as we did so and this is what we found. And secondary research is primarily revisiting, reviewing, analyzing, and synthesizing existing research and just presenting it in a new light. So usually it doesn't add so much to literature, but it adds to your perspective because everything is out there in one place. And then there are editorials and opinion piece, which are smaller articles and focused on one particular topic and one particular area of interest. So apart from primary articles, the secondary ones also can be of various kinds, such as a narrative review, a case-based review, a systematic review. So meta-analysis is usually counted more as a primary kind of research, although there's some debate to it. And then tertiary articles can comprise of textbooks, handbooks, manuals, or encyclopedia. So this is data which is out there and it has been around for a while, and you are just writing it up again in a simplified format for a more basic level researcher, basic level reader. And then gray literature is comprised by conference proceedings, posters, abstracts, government reports, university articles or documents. any kind of listings, online forums, blogs, and with the advent of social media, there's so much information out there which all comes under the banner of grey literature. And then there's some special articles, which can be letters, editorials, pictorial essays, and few other interesting ones, which we will talk about in a bit. So coming to reviews, usually reviews, looks like my pen is on. Yes. So reviews usually could be narrative reviews or systematic reviews. So narrative review is written by a seasoned researcher. It is usually solicited, and it is an authoritative and comprehensive overview of a particular subject, and it adds to the perspective of the reader. There's no definite structure to it. Usually it has an abstract, and then as it's the author's discretion. Citation impact is excellent because it has a lot of data consolidated out there and which can be cited by numerous other researchers. Systematic reviews could be conducted by anyone, and they are usually unsolicited. They have to be registered ideally on a platform known as Prospero. They have certain reporting standards like Prisma, and the search strategy is structured. It has to be verified by ideally 2 people or 3 or a bigger team, and it needs to be documented. So the intent is, if anyone were to set out to do such a study, they should be able to read your methods and reproduce the same results. And then the structure, the IMRAD structure, which we will be familiar in a bit. That's what we'll be talking about today and the next session. And the analysis stage, sometimes the systematic review, particularly meta-analysis, will comprise of analysis where you will report it in this format: the population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. Citation impact of these are good, as this is a wealth of data all compiled together, and usually gives a clear and new message than what is known. So just to give an example of this is a systematic review, the impact of ethnicity on clinical outcomes in COVID, and this is a review, a narrative review. So if nothing is written, it's usually a narrative review. And as expected, the narrative review would comprise of a search strategy. They would have clean records. They would have excluded certain articles for various reasons, which will be clearly cited, either the language, or they're not related to the topic, or the full text are not available. So the methods are clean. And then they have a data synthesis where they would describe, like here they are comparing the risk of COVID or the cases reported of COVID in different ethnicities compared with white patients. And you can see they have listed articles based on the type of literature they have scanned. And most of the preprints have identified an increased risk of infection, hospitalization, as well as mortality. So this data was out there in the public domain, but this clear message was not available before the systematic review was conducted. Apart from that, case reports are the lowest form of evidence, but sometimes you can also synthesize and systematically review data related to cases. For example, if you were to report a drug-induced complication, for example, here it is propyl thiouracil-induced myositis. So here this patient had these symptoms, and then literature was searched on various databases, PubMed, Embase, and Scopus, to identify these articles. Some were excluded because of repetition or in languages other than English or not relevant to the search criteria. And eventually you will have fewer articles. So this is a simpler exercise than a systematic review, but it would identify the other cases which are reported of a rare entity, and your case will be out there for comparison, and you can clearly see how it stands with respect to literature. So this is a better compilation and reporting of data than a simple case report. So publication is, all of you might wonder if it's a sprint, you might like to think so, but usually it is a marathon. And your perfect team may be placed in geographically disparate locations, and you may not always be in the situation to publish data from real patients, because quality primary research requires good cohort-based data or randomized control trials, which may take a lot of time. You may be in a new job, you may not have access to patients or wouldn't have enough patients as yet. You may not be able to collaborate in the immediate environment, or you may not have patients of your favorite disease. So still there are ways to drift afloat and with your favorite teams by doing research which is not limited to a particular site or location. So before we move further, you must be aware of the hygiene hypothesis, the very famous hygiene hypothesis, which talks about predisposition to asthma, and this was actually reported by this gentleman known as David Strachan, who was an epidemiologist at the London School of Epidemiology and Tropical Hygiene. And this was a hypothesis paper which was published way back in 1989. And it was not believed that time. He did a simple study. This was basically afterthoughts from a previous study which he conducted in 17,000 British children who were born in households, and he found an indirect correlation between the risk of hay fever and the number of individuals in the family. So this was a very casual observation which made him curious, and for a long time it was not believed until you see 1992 when 3 citations poured in, and not until a decade later that more evidence started emerging with the advancement of immunology techniques. So better understanding of immunology and his hypothesis was now better understood. But yes, hypothesis articles are something. He did base it on his previous data, but you could also conduct hypothesis-based research by gathering or systematically searching data on a particular subject and formulating your own hypothesis. There are certain ethical issues to hypothesis articles, and not all journals accept those, but this can be avoided by a detailed listing of the pros and cons and the limitations of your hypothesis. It is more ethical, and this is the best kind of research because it takes research forward in the years to come. Apart from that, there can be methods paper. I'm sure you would be familiar with trial protocols. So oftentimes we see randomized control trials which are published, much awaited randomized control trials. Before they're out, the trial protocol would be published, and a systematic search strategy is another way. If you're conducting a systematic review, you could publish your search strategy prior to the actual systematic review. Sometimes guidelines are delivered and these also are published, and the process then becomes a method paper. Apart from that, if you have detailed a case record form for collection of data by through collaborations, then that can be published so that other researchers can use that and avoid that effort. Apart from that, various laboratory techniques can be published as a methods paper, which is sometimes counted as an original article. So if you have a novel experimental method, a new technique of the laboratory, or even if you've deviated protocol and you have validated your findings that yes, you can reach the same results, this test is as valid, even with this deviated protocol, then that is important for researchers to know. And this comes under the category of a technical note. Similarly, if you've biobank samples or followed a separate technique for something, then that comes under method paper. The advantages for this approach are many. Firstly, your methods are now subject to peer review. So this, you are still in the process of beginning the study. You haven't yet begun. And if the peers identify defects in your methods, then they will be identified at this stage itself. And you have still got a chance to improve your study. It also increases the transparency because there is a positive reporting bias in publication. So even if you get negative results, now that you've published the trial protocol or the methods, it's likely that you will be transparent about all the results obtained. Also, it's available in public domain. So if it's a novel hypothesis or a novel study, then it stays there and it's documented. Moreover, other people may not embark on such initiatives because they know you're already doing it. Instead, researchers and patients may come forward and collaborate with you on this. Besides, you need to, it cuts down the words in your eventual paper. So you have to give reduced details. You end up, in fact, citing your own paper, which is an advantage in some ways. Besides, it prevents selective publication, again, something like related to transparency. And it may also be useful if you have a big cohort and you are planning to collect, deliver, identify different messages from that same data set, which is a registry, and you are going to publish many papers based on that, then it is preferable to first have the methods documented so you don't have to describe them in detail in every manuscript. So this is an example. We'll quickly go through a few. It is the systematic review of interventions to reduce loneliness in adults. And it was, so they published the search terms, the keywords which they used for search, and a data extraction form. Apart from that, they also published the research, quality, and bias assessment tools. The Prisma flowchart is part of all of these papers. Similarly, if there is a workshop or a meeting in which something very important was discussed, this is again something which can be a conference summary. For example, the global conference for reactive arthritis, unfortunately, the last one was in 2000, where Zergen, Braun, and Sieper, two stalwarts in the field, identified the issues which were discussed, including the emerging spectrum of bacteria which lead to the disease, the immunology, the clinical profile, and also they define the criteria for reactive arthritis, which continue to be used even 2 decades later. Similarly, in India, we have previously documented if you have a collaborative network which you're trying to set up, or if there's something important coming out of a meeting, it is best if it's documented and out there in the public domain for others to know and join you in that endeavor. Similarly, if you have designed case record forms and you want people to collaborate with you on it, you would not want them to go through the same exercise. And if it is available in the public domain, it is good as they can come forward and join hands in this exercise. Moreover, in this era of evidence-based medicine, it is very important to document the disease activity and use appropriate outcome measures. So if you're wanting a very detailed outcome measures, then it is best they detail all of them in a glossary of the research items, which is best done if you've published the case record form prior, as all this may not be possible in the eventual manuscript, where the word limit is obviously restrictive. Similarly, if you were to biobank or do some kind of laboratory research, and it is a modified protocol like a cost-efficient model which is relevant for a developing country, then this is again something you could take up, where you describe the step-by-step process, sample collection, transport, storage, and quality control, and the advantages, how it is cost-cutting in doing this kind of a thing, because this can then be used by other people. And this is again comes under the category of an original article. So this is something you are reporting even before you've begun the research, but you have not formulated the results. It's a method paper, and it would carry the detailed checklist, including the biospecimen processing, the clinical case details, collection and transport, everything step by step, so it can be reproduced by another person doing it. And if a large collaborative group of experts does it, then it can also come under the category of recommendations. Like the USTAR group has provided biobanking details for systemic sclerosis. Now, in this era of social distancing, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the survey-based studies, either have been an investigator or a participant. So this is something, in the interest of time, we will leave this discussion for another day. But yes, special articles it's all about a narrative eventually, and it is proposed that the narrative is the glue that holds literature and medicine together, and hence even comics have found their way into the special articles category. So a picture is anyways worth 1,000 words. So there are journals who which take up cartoons, and usually the cartoons have a brief introduction and some clear messages for the readers. Like this one talks about taking care of the patient with the best systematic review, best data, but what is missing is the compassion, which obviously we all need to be reminded of. Apart from that, various journals like the journal of American Medicine Association, publishes poetry on a routine basis. And there are many others. So the poets amongst us now would know where to head to right after this lecture. And this brings us to the end of the session. We would probably take questions at a later time.